So think about this paradox, which I don't think has been examined well enough. You are arguing simultaneously and extremely passionately for both reason and freedom, right? And the freedom that you're talking about is not the freedom from that Pankaj spoke of. It is the freedom to. It is the freedom to consume. It is the freedom to engage. It is the freedom to indulge. And if you look at yourself, if you don't need to look at any macro public policy perspective, you just understand your own self. The more you indulge in sensory pursuits, it is logical that your ability to reason will dwindle. So, on one hand, because there is this zeitgeist of freedom, we are pushing constant consumption and excessive sensory indulgence. And at the same time, we are still making reason the arbiter. So, how are we simultaneously able to argue for unfettered freedom and reason as the sole arbiter? And this is a challenge that the Western policymaking has come to recognize.
There is a cosmic order which is not easily graspable to all of us, but which exists. So, this order was disturbed when man discovered technology. Because in nature, everyone, and to use Dr. Ramanuji's phrase, everyone at the same time is the hunter and the hunted. So, while you are hunting, you are also at the risk of being hunted. But when man became the apex predator by discovering technology, he actually came out of the chain and disturbed that natural order.
A very good evening. Welcome to Bharat Varta and Swarajya. This is a joint podcast, and my name is Sharan Setty. I'll be your host for this particular podcast. Now, obviously, on the front of social media and content, there's a lot of changes that we've been seeing in the last few years. And one of those changes comes in the form of a platform called Brhat, whom I have personally admired and I've had friends who work there. And this is a platform that's aesthetically beautiful, culturally rooted, and looks forward to making an impact in terms of leadership development and also making some policy changes. I have its founders with me, Pankaj Saxena ji and Raghava Krishna ji. Pankaj ji, Raghava ji, thank you so much. Namaste and welcome to Bharat Varta.
Namaste, Sharan. Thank you so much for having us. Look forward to this
No, it's a
conversation.
pleasure. It's my pleasure to have you on this platform. And first of all, I think it's only fair if we start with a little bit of an introduction about Brhat. I think any particular platform or an idea, whenever it's begun, usually if you meet with the CEOs and the startup founders in Bangalore, they tell that every idea should be able to be conveyed in a single sentence. But in a positive way, Brhat actually emulates multiple meaningful dialogues and messages because everybody can make something subjectively about Brhat. So, what is Brhat according to you?
Okay, all right. Now it's a good place to begin, and I'm a bit familiar with that world of startups and one lines and Y combinators, X meets Y. I've mentioned this before. The one thing that Brhat differs from from a typical startup kind of constitution is that in a startup world you'll not get funding if you need more than one miracle. Brhat is multiple miracles all the time, so we were never definitely not going to be funded by Y Combinator if we had to pitch it there. So the work that we do is in three interlinked areas, Sharon: cultural storytelling, policy research based on Indian knowledge systems, and investment in people, or what we call civilizational leadership. And we don't look at these three things as disparate, distinct units. We see a strong connection there. In fact, there is a strong turn in public policy towards culture and evolutionary sciences. And this is not just coming from the Indian perspective. There's a lot of academic literature coming from the West as well on this. So we look at cultural storytelling, which gives stories of meaning, of metaphors that people can anchor on, and a way for us to understand where we belong and why we belong there, and how that intersects and interacts with policy, and how policy making should in fact be grounded there. It should be about identity. It should be about reinforcing the cultural attitudes that your civilization has, and how do we bring these things together. That's the imagination that we have at Bṛhat. But none of these things are going to be possible without the active agency of empowered individuals. That is what we mean by leadership development. And in the Bharatiya imagination, it is always about embodied consciousness. It is about the strength of your sankalpa. So when we say civilizational leadership, we are talking about the conviction, both the moral conviction and the intellectual conviction that we need to generate in our people about our culture. So these are the three areas of our work. I am aware that it feels like a lot, but maybe I can quickly distill it into three actions We do three things, Sharon. We create stories through words, images, and videos. So far, we've written about 60, 65 long form essays on different aspects of culture and knowledge systems. We produce short videos on metaphors in Indian art and other aesthetic and art related matters. We're soon going to expand that into long form video content. And then we also create opportunities for people to engage in our culture. So that is the creation part. We also provide consulting services for whether it is a government initiative or it is a private initiative in the cultural sphere. We provide cultural research support to help people organize and conduct culture related activities. So, for example, we partner with the IKS division of Ministry of Education quite extensively to organize and do the public communication design for their IKS related work. Just 2 days ago, we were at Tanjore for the latest edition of Dhara event, which is conceived by the division, which was on Natya and Sangeeta Parampara. So we help other people, and this is a big opportunity that we are looking to open up as well for the creative industry. We now see, if you look at the broader macro trend, whether it is Kantara, whether it is RRR, whether it is Kashmir Files, you see that culture is now becoming business strategy as well. Right? These are not two divergent areas anymore. Culturally rooted, authentic content will have a greater traction in consumers. This is the case that we're looking to make. And to make it authentic, you will need a team of writers, of creative artists, of people who understand culture in a way that is lived and deeply studied. So that's the consultancy service that we provide. And we also curate experiences for people. Just in a month from now, we are taking a delegation of about 25 people that Pankaj is leading through a cultural tour of Odisha based on
Okay.
temples. We've done 2 circuit tours in Hoysala already in Karnataka. So these are felt experiences that we create. Apart from this, we create learning resources. We conduct online courses. As we speak now, we are conducting a course on Hindu iconography. And I'm very, very pleased to say that about 150 people have participated in that. And this is a very deep take into understanding what the civilizational motives are. So, three areas: cultural storytelling, culture creatives, policy research based on Indian knowledge systems, and leadership development, and three actions.
Very good luck to you. That seems like a lot on your plate already, and it seems like you have a lot going forward as well. Pankaj, first of all, some of the keywords from what Raghava just spoke: culture, and then government and policy making. Let's begin by defining culture, right? So, what, according to you, is culture? Because every individual living in a different society would define culture in a certain way, but obviously we have a broader understanding of culture in that sense. So what is the understanding of culture when it comes to Brhat and Brhat's work?
Thank you, Sharon. I'd like to start with the very necessity of defining culture, the word culture. Just about 100 years ago, when we were mostly working, thinking, reading, and writing in our native languages, hardly anyone thought of defining it because everyone knew instinctively, just by the word itself, what culture was. Because in Sanskrit mainly it is called as Sanskriti, and nature is called as Prakriti. The two words are very similar. It's very easy to understand what Sanskriti means, what Prakriti means. Prakriti is that which naturally is, and Sanskriti is that which we spiritually refine and create a civilization. But as soon as the word culture comes and we start reading definitions, the first definition that I read in a dictionary of culture, it was very particularly in the European colonial context, which is still largely used about a lot of things. That culture is that which man uses technology to battle against the forces of nature and to win against the forces of nature, and that is culture. How you use technology to transgress the boundaries that nature has put on you. But that is not something a Hindu would experience culture as. That is not something a man from a traditional society, a person from a traditional society would experience culture as. Because for us, the experience was very different. For us, there was no conflict between culture and nature, between Prakriti and Sanskrit. They were complementary of each other. And that is seen throughout our disciplines. It's very easy to see that because I study Hindu architecture more than other disciplines and Hindu aesthetics. So I would just take a small example to explain what culture was and still is in through a Hindu eye. If you consider the entire breadth of Hindu disciplines, first of all, the first thing that you will realize that all the Hindu disciplines are very connected to each other, very deeply connected to each other. It's very hard to study these disciplines in isolation. So if you are studying architecture, you would also study darshan and other things. Culture in this view for us is not something that exists against nature. It is not something that exists in contradiction with nature. For example, if you see a temple, the requirement of creating a temple, a great temple, is that it should be near a sacred water body. It can be either a lake or a river or an ocean side. And there has to be a sacred grove around it. Grove is not what you would cultivate. Grove, as in you would protect a piece of land as pristine forest. And that's where you will create a temple. There are various such temples across India right now. One researcher counted that there are still 1400 such sacred groves around the sacred temple, which are still left, which are still intact. One greatest example is Sringeri. If you enter Sringeri, the whole environs is as it would be 1000 years ago, 800 years ago. And the nature is as preserved in that within those precincts as culture is. It is very deeply a cultural institution, but at the same time, it also preserves nature. For example, if you go to a metropolitan city in India right now, in a big city, often the only place where you will find some nature which is intact is within the precincts of a temple, where it has been left to take its own course along with all the cultural activities that regularly go on. So for us, it was not something that we saw against nature. Culture was something that actually worked as a stand in nature. I will just go 2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes deep into it. When man became man by discovering technology and language and established himself as the apex predator, actually, he created a great imbalance in nature. Nature has its own order, which is called as in Sanskrit as Rit, and in English it would be roughly translated as the cosmic rhythm. There is a cosmic order which is not easily graspable to all of us, but which exists. So this order was disturbed when man discovered technology, because in nature, everyone, and to use Dr. Ramanuji's phrase, everyone at the same time is the hunter and the hunted. So while you are hunting, you are also at the risk of being hunted. But when man became the apex predator by discovering technology, he actually came out of the chain and disturbed that natural order. Culture is what the order which came, the arbitrary order which came to reclaim the boundaries, reclaim the order that was destroyed when the first natural order was transcended. This is what culture. For example, if you see the archaeological history, paleontological history of the world, you will see that all over the world, wherever man goes first of all, there is a great culture, ecological destruction. All the great, as they say, the big game is killed, and there is great ecological imbalance. But then suddenly, after a few hundred or 1,000 years, a new order comes in, an order which is not natural, an order which is created by man-made society itself, an order which is given the pedestal by human society of divinely ordained order, which on one hand reclaims the boundaries of nature, and on the other hand improves our nature spiritually, so that we transcend nature spiritually. So in our text, you are every individual is again and again exhorted to rise above his conditions, but not physically, spiritually. The freedom in this sense is very different. So that's what our culture is, that which works in tandem, in continuum of nature, and that which also refines nature. This, it's a very big topic, but just to give names of a few binaries, in our culture, Prakriti and Sanskriti, they work together. Prakrit and Sanskrit, they work together. So in the West, you will see this conflict in the binaries all over. There, the classical language is trying to suppress the vernacular language. Here, Sanskrit actually helped the vernacular languages to develop a vocabulary of their own and then develop great literature of their own. And even when people wrote regional text in Sanskrit, it helped extol the vernacular region. For example, Kalhan's Raj Tarangini is written in Sanskrit, but it tells a story of Kashmir. It extols the greatness of Kashmir. And on the other hand, it keeps providing the seed to all other languages. So Sanskrit and Prakrit, Sanskriti and Prakriti, Lok and Shastra. The folk culture and the classical culture never were at odds with each other. One did not supplant each other, they supplemented each other. For example, in all the Hindu temples, you will see that local gods and goddesses, along with Shiv, Vishnu, and the Panchayatan gods, Surya, Ganpati, and all other gods, Ram, Krishna, the local gods and goddesses are also worshipped. If you see after Kantara, that region has become very famous and the local gods have become very famous. And if we go to any temple in that region, you will see the Shiva is worshipped very well, Vishnu is worshipped deeply, but along with these two, actually, the local gods and goddesses are everywhere. They are present in every temple. So, Lok complements Shastra, Shastra complements Lok. And this is how the nature culture boundary in our civilization was, Sanatan civilization was. Culture was that which recreated the boundaries of nature and improved on nature spiritually. And that is what culture was and still is in our view. There is a continuum between nature and culture, there is no conflict. On the other hand, the colonial, the Judeo Christian paradigm is that of conflict. Man is eternally in conflict with nature. And if you see, a lot of Western literatures are too focused on that theme, man against nature. This theme is a favorite theme of Western literature. One of the most famous, Ernest Hemingway, very compelling author. Old Man and the Sea is the same. Then my own favorite, Jack London, English American literature, and all that depicts is the fight against nature, and so many other novels, so many other dramas and literature. This theme is reflected, which in India was never the theme. For example, here in India, Kalidas makes nature a messenger of an individual. The cloud is the messenger of the individual. There is no conflict. There is he is not lamenting that, oh, the cloud is there, oh, there is monsoon, I cannot go and meet my beloved. He's actually making the cloud do his own work. Look at the beauty of it. The universe, the nature actually becomes an accessory to this man's romantic musings. And this is how we reflect this continuum in our literature. So that is what culture is for us.
Thank you so much for that. And some of the effects of this westernized way of thinking when it comes to Indian policy making as well, we've seen the side effects of it over the last 78 years because we've largely inherited that British colonial mindset, even when it comes to policy making as well. So somehow we are quite orphaned when it comes to inculcating a lot of elements of culture in our policy making. And so why is it important going forward, and how will that make a difference from what we're seeing right now?
We, whatever institutions, the state, the judiciary, the executive, and all the institutions that we are going through now, that we are experiencing now in modern Indian state, we have adopted them from a civilization, a culture which was not ours. And incidentally, it belonged to a culture which ruled on us, which was against us, which was the colonial culture. So, all of these institutions are based on premises, based on the foundational ideas, which were not born through the hardships and culture of our own culture and civilization. They were born in some other cultural chitta bhumi, other cultural psychic plane. And any institution which will be born there, it is not necessary that if you implement that institution anywhere else, it will be conducive to that culture. For example, a very small example that I'll give in through temple once again, that going on individual rights based on rule of law, in 1970s, an act was passed, the Tenant Act. The Tenant Act said that anyone who is living on a piece of land for, I do not remember exactly, but more than 15 or 20 years, even if he does not have the deed of the land, he is the owner of that land, and the government will give him or her the deed of that land. So, on surface, if you are not privy to the internal workings of Sanatan Hindu civilization, you would think, what's wrong with this? It's actually fine. If nobody is objecting, he's living on a piece of land, then he should have that land. But what happened is that the Hindu temple had a beautiful ecosystem. So the rich, the king and the Vaishya would donate lands. Mostly the donations were in food and land. So they would donate land to the temple. And the temple would then in turn redistribute that land to the needy and the poor. But how? It would create a beautiful ecosystem. It would not just give away. It would make people work on that land, till that land, and they could use it as their own, live on it, pass it on to their children, live on the produce that that land produced. But in return to the temple, they would offer a seva to the temple. Which was not a job, it was a seva to the temple. So they were connected to the temple. They could not sell that land, so the beautiful ecosystem would never get destroyed. They could pass it on to their children in eternity, no problem. But they could not sell it to perhaps a contractor so that we would create a 24-story building right next to an ancient temple. That would never happen. But with this act, what happened is that whoever was residing on the lands all around the temple ecosystem, he suddenly became the owner of that land. And many of these lands were in the center of great cities. So suddenly, those lands became multiples of crores, and the beautiful ecosystem, because we cannot go deep into it, but that Hindu temple ecosystem, it was a legal system, it was a social system, it was a food distribution, social network system, social justice, and social welfare system. All of these systems were connected to temple and the land holdings that it had all around it. And that beautiful system was just struck away with one stroke of pen, because the policymakers, because the institutions that we are undergoing right now are not conducive to our culture. And that is why this discrepancy and this great violence, ethnical, cultural violence against our cultural artifacts and institutions, it happens. And this is inevitable, it will happen because an alien paradigm, institutions based on a foreign paradigm, are being used by us without thinking about the local culture, the indigenous culture. And actually, people advise that there has to be no connection between culture, that they have to be thought in silos, that you cannot connect culture and policy. And that is the has been the wisdom until just recently. So Raghavji would expand more on that.
Sure. I think it's a compelling example. Maybe I'll take a little step back to try and trace the evolution of public policy as a paradigm itself. But before I do that, I think it's very important to sum up the points that Pankaj made. And I'm reminded of the great DVG's quote. He said, when an object in nature is made sacred by an act of man, that is culture. The sum total of what we're discussing as a sacred culture. And he also mentioned the role of institutions, our institutions, and how the entire civilization design, and any civilization, anything for it to endure as a system, is about how the different components of that system are codependent and they are creating a positive surplus. Take family, take temples, take Gurukula. The whole idea is, and this is critical to understanding the complexity behind biodiversity as well. Some of the central global grand challenges that we have, which we do not seem to have any answers for, it is because the systems are now composed of elements which are not complementing each other, but are actually cannibalizing each other. And that will only add up to disaster at a macro level. Right? And that is where we need to understand why culture plays a role in policy making. So this is now being called as the fourth wave in public policy. This is being pioneered by professors like Michael Muthukrishna and others. So they said the first wave of public policy was based on the metaphysics of reason, and that is whatever Pankaj mentioned about an alien paradigm. It is about the knowledge system or the ontological content of that civilization. If you look at the Western civilization, and of course, there's been a tremendous amount of material growth, and we should respect that. And we should also be very, very keen in participating wherever we can. But we should recognize that the fundamental metaphysics is different. There is a metaphysics of reason that guides the Western pursuit. That is because they privilege, and that has emerged as a conflict between the faith that was imposed from above and the reason that emerged from the culture at that time. So within their worldview, that is an extremely moral paradigm. Maybe there is not enough self-reflection to think about how that led to colonization, how that led to more technology-induced war and the strife that wars ensue. But fundamentally, the story is that the reason is the main arbiter. We are all capable of being rational human beings, and therefore, public policy is about how do we use reason as the fundamental conduit. In our culture, reason is given its importance, but it is never made supreme because there is also a role for intuition, and reason is a function of the mind. And the focus of our culture, of our knowledge system, of our metaphysics was on the refinement of the mind. The whole technology that we have is about the elevation of consciousness. So think about this paradox, which I don't think has been examined well enough. You are arguing simultaneously and extremely passionately for both reason and freedom, right? And the freedom that you're talking about is not the freedom from that Pankaj spoke of. It is the freedom to. It is the freedom to consume. It is the freedom to engage. It is the freedom to indulge. And if you look at yourself, if you don't need to look at any macro public policy perspective, you just understand your own self. The more you indulge in sensory pursuits, it is logical that your ability to reason will dwindle. I cannot be the same person under the drug influence or if I'm drunk. Right? So on one hand, because there is this zeitgeist of freedom, we are pushing constant consumption and excessive sensory indulgence, and at the same time, we are still making reason the arbiter. So, how are we simultaneously able to argue for unfettered freedom and reason as the sole arbiter? And this is a challenge that the Western policymaking has come to recognize. In fact, reason itself has been appended by the second wave, what Michael Muthu Krishnaji calls as the second wave, which was the behavioral economics. We all understand the evolution there, which said that we are not really that rational. There is a lot of subconscious dominance in the decision making. If you look at literature in psychology, particularly Jonathan Haidt and others, the metaphor of elephant and the rider comes to the mind. Right? That it is your emotional and psychological content more than your ability to reason that dominates the choice making. And the third wave in that, which was linked to behavioral economics, but also complemented by developments in science, was the neurosciences worldview, which is examining the chemical and the neural process that we have to understand how decisions are made, how choices are made by human societies and human beings. That is the frontier that they had. The fourth level, because even that was not enough, we were still not able to explain sufficiently what is the basis for public choice. The fourth wave, which is now being talked about, includes other disciplines and other purchase within policymaking, particularly the idea of culture, of how culture, rituals, social structures influence the way people think about choices, because that is the fundamental identity formation process. And it also takes into account the evolutionary sciences. So they're talking about dual inheritance. So this is called the fourth wave of public policy, where increasingly policy makers are now being asked to look at cultural aspects. In fact, IDR has recently released an example of how a village in Bihar, and I've seen this personally myself in Chhattisgarh and other places, where if you anchor your policy pitch in a cultural language, if you're able to talk to people in the in the terms that they use and with the meanings that they ascribe to those terms, you are far likely to get traction than by talking about development and progress in a vacuum. Idea has done a recent edit about how a village in Bihar was able to use a local ritual towards a policy goal. This is the kind of change that we are seeing, and especially now because we are 20 25 years into the liberalization phase. We've gotten great benefits from it. In fact, I am a beneficiary of that entire movement. So there's a lot of respect and understanding there. But we are now getting into a phase where the quest for identity and culture is becoming prominent. If you look at the entire public discourse, it has moved from outside the fold to within the fold. There is a very large spread disillusionment with ideas like secularism. There is a quest for knowing where we've come from, what our knowledge systems are, what is the right sort of definition that we give for ourselves. When the collective consciousness shifts inwards, then you will have to look at your own culture, you will have to look at your own knowledge systems as the source. And this is where we see a role for organizations, individuals who are anchored in our culture, who understand our culture not superficially, but like Pankaj, who's actually gone to more than 1,200 temples to document each of them, to understand the entire complex ecosystem that we call an institution, and to bring that knowledge back into policymaking. This is where I see, and this is, we understand this in a product development world, Sharon. If you go to any top-notch design agency or a product development world, I worked in gaming, you will see the team is always cross-functional. You will see a linguist working with a programmer. You will see a cultural anthropologist who is working with a graphic designer. You will see a concept artist who is working with somebody who is in linguistics. Because this association between words, culture, programming, code, design is the secret recipe of a great product. If that is true for product development, it is also true for policy making. In fact, you cannot talk about diversity without understanding the diversity that this land spawned, and you have to understand the design for the diversity as well. At first, it is always about theodiversity. Whatever Pankaj mentioned about the link between nature and culture and how culture sanctifies and sacralizes nature, it is that metaphysics that created a civilization. at least the enduring Sanatana Dharma that we call as a civilization, that we call ours, is coming from that experience, and it can be summed up in three lines. Nature requires diverse material for evolution. That is nature's play. Right? That is the biodiversity. But that is protected by cultural diversity. This is the secret insight of the Bharatiya Sanatana Dharma Parampara, that there is a link between cultural diversity and biodiversity. Without biodiversity, the planet will not survive. The planet will survive, humanity will definitely not. And without cultural diversity, we will not be able to protect the diversity that nature requires to experiment and create and spawn life. And therefore, what you call religion, what you call culture, in our understanding, is the act, the social act, the collective act, the constitution that always establishes this link between culture and nature. And that is what we need if we are to solve the problem of environment, of ecology, of migration, of soil quality loss, of water. All of these global grand challenges that we're talking about are not going to be solved by just talking about them. We need to go into culture.
I think the changes are being reflected in the last few years, like I said, especially with Brŭhat playing one of the major roles. At least on social media, it's made things so colorful and beautiful. And along with the content that you're exploring, the impact that you're having on leadership or even policy making, it's aesthetically really pleasing to see something like Brŭhat come out, right? So, what's the importance of aesthetics when it comes to culture and policy making, Pankaj?
Aesthetics has always been central to our civilization, as art is. And any treatise, any shastra, if you consult any shastra, it will expound as much on how to be an artist, as much as it expounds on how to be an aesthete. Its responsibility is not limited to tell how to create good art, but also how to appreciate good art. And that person, for example, it is seen in our vocabulary itself. There is a word nagrik, which in English would very dryly be translated as the word citizen. But nagrik is much more than that. Nagrik is actually a person as defined in our text on aesthetics in Saundara Shastra, text Shastra, as a person who does not just live in the city, but supports great art, architecture, sculpture, music, painting,
Right.
who has learned all these kalas to be able to appreciate it, who has cultivated these pleasures. He is also a rasik. He takes ras in the world, but he has these rasas are higher pleasures, higher rasas. So he has taught himself these disciplines so that he can enjoy the higher pleasures, and not only that, he supports them and he propagates them. That is the definition of a nagrik. So you cannot just call yourself a nagrik if you buy a flat and start living in a city, as people often do now. You have to do all of this. You have to support art, because art in our culture has been a vehicle of meaning making. The reason that Hindu darshan, Hindu philosophy has seeped to every little corner of Bharatvarsh is through art and through the art of storytelling. See, if you want to, if a culture, a civilization wants to uh, convey its central principles, siddhanta, foundational ideas to every nook and corner, to every individual, there are only two ways. One is the totalitarian way, that the state becomes so powerful that it is capable of forcing through violence the central idea onto everyone, like the Soviet state once did, like the Nazi state once tried to do, like the modern states, various states are trying to do. On the other hand, Sanatan Dharma had found a very good idea, which does not encounter any violence. In fact, it uses the act of creation, act of creating art, and this is how we create meaning. The greatest of truths of our, which are expounded in our shastras, they are converted into very brief stories, aphorisms, metaphors, idioms, and through the tradition of Katha Pravachan Parampara, by these roaming bards and mendicants who would travel through all the length and breadth of India and sing and talk about this. And this is how uh, every person would come to know about it. And not just that, the greatest truth, because these are the universal cosmic principles which our rishis discovered. They did not create it. But we have to be very clear that the principles that our shastras expound, they give, is not the product of the imagination of a philosopher. These are the eternal truths which these rishis, these sadhaks see in their sadhana. and then they codify it in the language that we can understand and give it to us. So these truths exist. Our seers just see them. That's why philosophy in our culture is called as darshan, that which you see, not what you think, or not what you love, not what you imagine, that which you see. So these principles are there, and these principles actually refer to the most basic human experiences which are privy to all of us. So when through the Katha Pravachan Parampara, these principles would be taken to every nook and corner of India, every individual and community would relate to it because there was a universal element. The story of Ram, the legend of Ram, there are so many aspects of it that everyone relates to it. For example, there is a son who just wants to follow his father, his every command, but he also loves his birthplace. And when he leaves Saket, there is that beautiful heart-rending scene where he is leaving Saket in the river on a barge, and you can see the pain of every man who had to leave his birthplace all the time through it, ever since eternity, ever since human civilization regained its consciousness. When Sita says that she will come with Ram to exile, he at the same time his experience is very bittersweet because he does not want her to suffer along with him, but at the same time he is comforted greatly that his beloved will be with him. He won't be alone in that exile. And then when she's taken, he is so composed, always the greatest of men, Maryada Purushottam. But when Sita is taken from him, he wails like any common man. He asks the leaves, the trees, the birds, where is my Sita? And which husband who does not love his wife, who loves his wife, would not do this? So these are the universal themes that all of us can relate to, do relate to. The greatest of truths expounded through these stories, which are universal in nature and taken to every nook and corner. This was done through art, and this cannot be done without creating great vehicles of aesthetics. And it was not just done verbally through stories, it was done through painting, it was done through sculpture, it was done through architecture. The same truths. Another great truth about Hindu aesthetics is that there is a sacred vocabulary which is not necessarily confined to words. That sacred vocabulary, that sacred language is common to all the Hindu disciplines. For example, just very brief word, darshan. Darshan is philosophy for us. But when you go to a temple, the act of going to a temple itself is called darshan. Because what happens when you go to a temple, when you stand in front of the garbhagriha, when you see the deity, what do you see? You are having darshan. It's not just for prayer. It's not for all other. It is also for all other things. But the primary objective of going to temple is to have darshan of the deity, to actually be able to see the greatest and highest of truths. Because when you have darshan of the deity, it is said that when all else, the sansar disappears. When you are alone with the deity, the devotee is alone with the deity, he becomes one with the deity. And in a sense, he sees his own truest self, his highest self. And that is the act of darshan. And in fact, all of our philosophy is that how to discover your truest self. So there is a common vocabulary which pervades through philosophy, which pervades through art, fine art, music, dance, painting, sculpture, iconography. And this is the language of aesthetics, which makes it possible to take the greatest of truths and to spread them far and wide through every nook and corner of Bharatvarsh, wherever the writ of Sanatan Dharma rules. And that is the role of aesthetics. It has always been that. That which is beautiful is also true. The ultimate truth cannot be unbeautiful. The supreme consciousness cannot be unbeautiful. It has to be beautiful. So that which is beautiful in the real, in the truest sense, is also the truth. It is also the ultimate truth. So aesthetics, in a way, art of seeing beauty is also the art of seeing truth. Aesthetic is a way of self-realization in Bharatvarsh. That is the beauty of Sanatan Dharma, that it would convert every discipline a vehicle of self-realization, and that is what aesthetics is too.
Thank you so much, Pankaj Raghavji, for joining us today. And it's been a while since I did any videos, but I'm glad through this video also resume my video journey once again. But before we sign off, Raghavji, what's the plan ahead for Brhat? What's the roadmap going forward? Um, if you could give us a few details, I think it will be very helpful.
Firstly, our whole worldview, there is a lot of comfort with emergence. It's a team of creative artists, and creative work has a non-linear scale. Right? It does not work and stick to the roadmap that we think we might imagine. But there is, of course, a design to the elements. But before I get there, I want to just add a couple of points to what Pankaj said because it's deeply important. He explained to us the importance and the significance of beauty. I want to locate that in the context of why it is critical for policymaking today. Why is beauty essential to policymaking today? Why is culture and aesthetics so critical to policymaking today? We are living in a performative world. Through the use of technology, any idea becomes a cultural trend. We've seen this right from Ice Bucket Challenge to whatever is happening today. You see that the mimicking process has been accelerated and globalized through technology, which means that attitudes, tastes, preferences, behaviors are shaped all of a sudden. And there is no way in the world that policy making can catch up with that. And we've now, as a process, if you understand the yogic process, what we've done is we've put our aham on steroids. We've stoked that. So we are constantly seeking for new ways of self expression. We are always on the lookout for performing to a degree which the world can then recognize. This is the truth, right? You are not going to solve any of the challenges that you need public participation in, which means all the challenges, without understanding the cultural psychology and the global psychology that we inhabit in today. So when in this world, when consumption has been put on steroids, when the personal has become ideological, when the pursuit is only performative, the question is what then is sustainable? Can we continue on the same extractive economy path with 10 billion people all looking to perform and consume? Can we ask them to not consume? Both these challenges, all of the policy making now wrestles with these two challenges. Right? You cannot say no, and you cannot also say yes because you know that there is a boundary condition. The larger goal that we think we have is to turn this desire, and this is also the Sanatana Dharma way, which uses art and aesthetics to actually transcend. So, if we are able to shift the consciousness of the global collective from consumption that is based on extraction to consumption of art, of culture, which is regenerative, which is both refining us at the same time, which does not have a negative externality on nature. If you are able to shift that, if you are able to use the power of art and culture, which is not about the individual, but it is about the transcendence, but gives you the satisfaction of being in aesthetic bliss. If you are able to popularize that, if your policy actually is able to create that consciousness, any sane global policy will have to anchor here is our contention. At least this is the argument that we're looking to put forward. So that is the reason why these three things are interlinked. And so therefore our roadmap, if you want to call it that, is also that. One, we'll continue to tell stories. In fact, we are conceptualizing a 50 episode series on regional languages and the link between language, great literature, and cultural consciousness. Through this, Pankaj has been poring over almost 50 books. Nivedita from the team, she's been going through multiple cultural artifacts, including books and movies. They've conceptualized something very, very beautiful that I'm looking forward to as an audience, not just as the person who's working alongside, of how they're going to hold that conversation. So that's coming up. We are also obviously looking at all the things that we do in Indian knowledge systems. We offer curriculum support for universities and other educational institutions which want to inculcate Indian knowledge systems into their overall mix. We also offer direct courses. Like I said, we have a course running on Hindu iconography right now. The amount of feedback that we've got about how transformative this is seen to be believed. There are people from the tourism industry who are saying that with this course equips us to actually talk to our talk to our clients in a much more elevated way. That is, when you talk about economic growth, how can that be linked to people development? How can that be linked to something that culture sustains? Right? That is through the knowledge systems. So we will continue to offer these courses. We also want to obviously create frameworks for people for self-authoring. One of the goals that we have at Brhat is that we should become a conduit for people to actually go through a personal learning pathway. So we've created some frameworks, a meta framework through which you can organize your knowledge. This entire civilizational landscape is a very tricky one, Sharon, and I'm sure you experienced this because you get into it, you sort of assign your identity to it, and then something comes up which you're not able to morally explain, and you're caught on the back foot. And it is this intimidation that stops a lot of people from engaging or being able to confidently represent culture. So we want to give them tools, we want to give them pathways and we want to help them understand and locate ideas in a way that they know what the limits of ideas and thinkers are, and they become their own authors of their own journey, and be able to endure in this civilizational pathway. So that's something that we are doing. We are also obviously, like I said, into leadership development. We're looking to open this up for corporates and also universities on public leadership. The whole idea of complexity thinking, which needs a knowledge system like the Bharatiya Gnana Parampara, the criticality of that for corporate leaders, the criticality of that for academic leaders, the criticality of that for parents and societal leaders. We want to actually open these courses and these interventions, which are deeper, immersive experiences in all these segments. So it's a composite. We will continue to tell stories. We'll produce curriculum and develop faculty on Indian knowledge systems, and we'll engage with people who are keen on the civilizational leadership journey. That's what it looks like.
Thank you, Raghavji. Thank you, Pankajji. Thank you so much for joining us. And please consider me a student. And a lot of us look forward to Brhat to learning from you.
A friend.
And
Yes.
I hope Brhat empowers and educates a lot more people in the near future to come. And obviously, we look forward to learning and exploring and collaborating in the future. Viewers, please do let us know what you thought about this episode in the comment section below. And if you have any comments or questions for Pankaj and Raghavji, please do let us know in the comment section below. Until next time, this is your host Sharan Setty winding up. Thank you.